My name is Ian Stamp, and I believe that the biggest wealth transfer for 85 years has already begun. In fact, the financial crisis started in 2008, but many believe it was just a speed bump along the road. My research confirms that we're in the early phases of the biggest global financial crisis since the 1930s Great Depression. This crisis is inevitable and will affect the entire world. So I don't say these things lightly. I have been watching and reading from a list of experts, and you can see the experts' opinions that I've been taking into account on this slide here. If you'd like to know more about what these people are saying, then you can visit the website here, www.WealthTransfer.guru, and take a look at the Wikipedia knowledge base. On this knowledge base, you can see contributions from all of these people on this slide. So let's have a look at what Money Week has to say about the financial crisis that we're walking into.
Everything about your way of life could be about to change dramatically. How you store your money, where you plan to retire, the way you protect your family and home. All of these things, we believe, are under threat. We don't make this prediction lightly. We're simply following our research to its logical conclusion. We did the same when we anticipated the global credit crisis, the property slide, and the collapse of the banks. In fact, in the 12 years we've been publishing Money Week magazine, this is the most serious warning we've ever made. As you'll see in this short film, we have uncovered an unsolvable problem at the heart of our financial system. We believe the outcome of this problem is inevitable, and the recession, joblessness, and instability you see right now is only the first stage of it. Many people think the slump we're in now is as bad as it will get, but the truth is, it's only the start. In fact, you'll certainly see the consequences of this deep-rooted problem unfold across the cities, towns, and villages of Britain. No one will escape the fallout. In all recorded history, no country has ever recovered from the financial position we find ourselves in today. No government has ever been able to reverse this trend. No emergency action has ever come close to a solution. This inescapable problem has only ever had one outcome: financial collapse.
So the biggest wealth transfer has already begun, and the causes of this wealth transfer, or the causes of the crisis, can be summarised as sovereign debt, derivatives liabilities, and unfunded liabilities. Right now, as I record this video, the world's sovereign debt, that's the debt of nations, is almost $60 trillion. The top 5 banks in the world have derivative liability exposure of $290 trillion. And US unfunded liabilities, that's liabilities to fund pensions and welfare, are a staggering $101 trillion.
As the U.S. financial crisis has faded, we have a new concern to worry about, all the pundits tell us, and that is the collapse of sovereign debt in many countries around the world. Our guest today, Mark Faber, writes the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. Mark, you're worrying about this as well. Where and what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, sovereign debt defaults throughout history has been very common. For centuries, sovereign states have defaulted on their obligations. Usually it happens because they borrow too much and just can't pay, and then they inflate and things don't turn out well, and then they default, like Latin America in the 80s and 90s. Many countries defaulted. Now, I believe that the next country that is very vulnerable would be, say, Japan or the United States, and also in Europe, within the EU, we have the so-called PIGS, in other words, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece and Spain. And these are countries that are quite vulnerable.
So what happens if one of the pigs says
Well,
one day,
before they default, usually they'll print money. And so they issue more and more debt, and they monetize, and then you get into high inflation rates, and that doesn't solve the problem. And then there's a huge financial reform where you just cross zeros off banknotes, and then you reissue new banknotes and so forth.
so what is it going to do to the world if some of the pigs roll over?
Well, I mean, I think it could weaken the euro. I mean, I'm not optimistic about the US dollar, but when I look at other currencies, they're not much better. And I spend a lot of time traveling. I think at the present time, actually, the price level in the US is reasonable compared to, say, the Eurozone. And so if there are problems in the Eurozone with Greece, Spain, Portugal, and so forth, what we could see is weakness in the euro, or maybe even the euro falling apart.
And coming back to what you said at the beginning, do you seriously think there's a chance that Japan or the US is going to default?
Well, I think based on historical precedents, it's very likely they will. Not tomorrow, and before they do, they'll print money like crazy, in other words, monetize the debt. But eventually, I think it's quite clear that the US will default. Or that they can't keep their obligations, say that Medicare has to be cut down, Medicaid cut down, Social Security recipients will get less money, or people will have to pay more tax. In either way, something will happen.
And assuming we default, what happens to society? Is it hunting squirrels in the park, barter system?
Well, usually before countries default, they'll print money, then you have hyperinflation, and that destroys essentially the middle class and the working class, and benefits, say, I mean, I don't want to pick on Goldman Sachs, but it benefits the financial wizards, the speculators, because they can move money in and out of the country very quickly and make huge speculative gains like the Fed recently did. And so then society deteriorates, and then in order to distract the attention of the ordinary people, you go to war.
As I record this video, the USA hits 19 trillion in sovereign debt.
The U.S. is in the red, about $19 trillion in the red, actually. According to the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the national debt broke records Friday when the total climbed over $19 trillion. But it didn't take too long to get there. The total rose by $1 trillion in about 13 months. About $13.7 trillion of that debt is held by the public. Internal government borrowing makes up the rest at about $5.3 trillion. The federal government is free to borrow as much as it wants as long as it doesn't hit the debt ceiling. Late last year, the debt ceiling was suspended and borrowing spiked. According to the Washington Examiner, the spike equaled about $339 billion in a single day. As of now, the debt ceiling remains suspended and borrowing can continue without a limit until March 2017.
Japan hits 1 quadrillion yen in sovereign debt.
Debt in Japan has reached the 1 quadrillion mark, that's 1,000 trillion yen, for the first time. It now means the country's economy is dwarfed by debt that is more than twice its size. While Japan's debt continues to gather pace amidst rocketing welfare costs, which have soared from 47 trillion yen to 103 trillion in 20 years, with its fiscal deficit expected to grow to 10.3% of GDP this year from 9.9% in 2012.
So, how big is $1 trillion? And all fiat currency systems inevitably collapse. And on this video, we can take a look at some that already have.
In 1922, Austria suffered inflation as high as 134%. 1932, 10 years later, Argentina was the 8th largest economy before it collapsed. 1944, Greece had an 8.5 billion percent per month. Prices doubled almost every 28 hours. 1946, here you see this is in bold, and also the one from Zimbabwe is in bold. Well, that's because those two were the worst ones in history. But 1946 in Hungary was the worst one. 4.19 quintillion percent inflation. That is unfathomable. I mean, I know that for the average person to understand that their currency, if you were living in 1946 back then and your and inflation went 4.19 quintillion. Imagine if that happens now in the U.S. with the way people live, their lavish lifestyles and high consumption and their SUVs and things like that. That's why they can't believe that this would ever happen. But back in Hungary, prices doubled every 15 hours. People had to spend their check fast enough, as quick as possible, because they didn't. They were watching what the price of their money was worth the next day. It was worth less every day, so they had to spend their checks very, very quickly. In 1984, Israel had 445% inflation rate. 1990, Peru 397%. 1992, Norway experienced major problems along with Italy and some other countries. 1993-94, Yugoslavia experienced inflation. 1993-95, Ukraine 1,400% inflation rate per month. 1994, the Mexican peso collapsed in what is known as the tequila hangover. 1997, Thailand's baht currency collapsed and spread to other nations. Very similar to Greece, huh? Problem over there spread and everybody was trying to contain it. And then in 1998, the Russian ruble, similar to Germany's, suffered inflation rates similar to Germany's Weimar Republic. 2001, the Turkish lira, one new lira was exchanged for $1 million old lira. Unbelievable. You would never think that would ever happen. And that was reformed in 2005. And then the most recent one that we've had that a lot of people are not aware of, or some people may be aware of the Zimbabwe very briefly, but they have no idea that all these failures in fiat, modern failures in fiat currencies have been happening since, the early 1900s, and even back in the Roman days when the Romans debased or devalued their currency as well. Guys, this has been going on for thousands of years, and there is all that evidence to support that fiat money has failed and will fail eventually.
In addition to sovereign debt, there are extraordinarily high derivative liabilities. Let's take a look at what that means.
Many possibilities for collapse exist, but none are more dangerous, none are more threatening than the collapse of the derivatives market. Today I will discuss what exactly is a derivative, easy explanation with diagrams, and they called it an investment vehicle. I would consider it something else, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in a moment, but here is just one example. They take car loans, they take mortgages, they take credit card debt, and they package it up right here, put a little bow on top, and they actually rate it at a AAA investment. And I put those in quotes intentionally because that is not something you want to invest in, that's for sure. So they gave it a AAA rating simply because it is the worst of the worst garbage, so they need to rate it at the highest rating, or else nobody would ever want to buy it. But here they are, collateralized debt obligations were bought up considerable amounts, and of course we saw where that had us. Well, this is what a derivative is. Forget my diagrams, forget Bloomberg, forget Wikipedia and all those equations. This is what a derivative is. It's a pile of garbage. And anyone who says that it's not a pile of garbage is probably somehow interconnected in with this system. But this is the truth. We have a pile of garbage being traded out there, being rated at a AAA investment, and our dollars, or basically being backed up by this.
Right now, Deutsche Bank, one of the world's biggest banks, has derivative liabilities of $73 trillion, which is almost 30 times the gross domestic product of Germany.
Hey friends, I have a very dynamic, in-the-moment update with Bix Weir from Road to Ruta ready for you. And boy, we're watching collapse happen in real time. Bix, as you know, we've been documenting the collapse. I've been doing it with Bill Holter, Rob Kirby, Andy Hoffman, yourself. So many others know what's going on, including Peter Schiff, Jim Rogers. The collapse is happening. And just this year alone, we've seen gold up 12% and silver is up 11%. And I don't think we've seen the end of it based on derivatives melting down, $55 trillion in derivatives exposure at Deutsche Bank. And according to Bill Holter, I just spoke with him yesterday, called him up just to get his opinion on it. He says Deutsche Bank's real derivatives position is closer to $75 trillion. Bix, there's so much going on. Where would you like to start?
All of the above. Truthfully, the gold and silver stuff, it's still on the computer program. It's still being rigged by the derivatives. Once the derivative meltdown happens, it affects so much of everything, and there's so many counterparties that are wobbling now. Deutsche Bank is an amazing story because, it's around 75. I'm hearing 85 trillion. But if they're the largest derivative holder in the world, and I think their stock's down, I don't know how much. It's cratering today again. There's definitely deep, serious problems at that bank, and they hold a lot of the European debt derivatives, and they're the counterparty. If that counterparty goes away, you're talking about a meltdown of the entire derivative system, including gold, including silver, including U.S., the swaps and the U.S. Treasuries, and all that stuff will melt away because they're such a large player. They are the biggest player, at least that of the banking system that we know of. So the whole meltdown of AIG, where the U.S. came in and bailed them out for $300 billion or something, that's nothing compared to what's going to happen at Deutsche Bank.
Well, Bix, you just mentioned Deutsche Bank's stock price. It just crashed to an all-time low, a record low on Tuesday. And what we're seeing happen here as the cascading collapse of derivatives begins to have that ripple effect around the globe, we're seeing people panic as they rush to precious metals, gold and silver in physical form, as everyone's starting to realize with $7 trillion in bonds, which now have negative yields, according to Zero Hedge, there is no safe harbor. The banks are the last place you want to put your cash. So more and more people are putting their money to work in physical precious metals.
Unfunded liabilities in the US stand at $101,350,000,000. Let's take a look at what that means. So what we're looking at here is the USA's debt clock. So all the figures in red are liabilities and all the figures in green are credits. And down here you can see that the US unfunded liabilities are just over $101 trillion. Now these liabilities are to fund pensions and welfare costs going forward into the future. If you take the entire debt of the US, that's sovereign debt and unfunded debt, and divide that by the number of the population of the USA, the debt per taxpayer is $159,759. Now, let's take a look at some of the other debt clocks. Let's first of all start with the UK debt clock. What you can see from the UK debt clock is that the United Kingdom has public debt of £1.639 trillion. What's interesting about the UK economy is by taking a look at the EU rankings. Now we're going to take a look at the ranking of all of the European economies, which is the budget surplus divided by the deficit. A positive figure means that the economy is in reasonably good shape. Negative figures mean that the economy is in poor shape. And what you can see, interestingly, is that the United Kingdom is actually fourth from bottom on this list. So let's have a look at the Japanese debt clock. It's a staggering figure, and this is probably the nation with the highest current sovereign debt in the world. Now, many believe that the Chinese have a very robust and strong economy, but when you start looking under the bonnet, you'll see that the Chinese have funded their growth over the last 30 years from debt. So let's take a look at the Chinese debt clock. Again, it's a staggering figure. Putting all this into perspective, we can take a look at the liquidity pyramid. Now, the liquidity pyramid shows where all of the liabilities are stacked in the shape of a pyramid, and we can see that here.
So I suppose the last issue that we'll cover here is this liquidity pyramid. And you sent me the PDF. I'm looking at it, and it is just striking to see how much paper wealth is out there. I mean, to see these stacks of paper dollar bills compared to skyscrapers, and then to look at the liquidity pyramid all the way down to the minuscule amount of silver, the fairly small amount of gold in relation to all of this paper out there. I mean, it's mind-bending to look at this PDF, Chris, but what else do you want to say as far as this liquidity pyramid?
I mean, this gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning with Biden saying, that we have to, basically redistribute all this money to the people and stuff like that. And this visually shows, I think this is one of those visual capitalist, PDF things, visually shows how insane this world is with this paper wealth schemes that have been built upon the real wealth in this world, which is, gold or silver. And again, I talked about how there's $1 quadrillion of derivatives. I think that's $1 billion or something like that. It's a number that only supercomputers could ever count. Then you got all these private business and real estate and municipal bonds and securitized debts and stocks and bonds and government bonds and local bonds, and then money that's in the bank, and then money that's circulating in physical currency, and then there's gold, and then you get to the very bottom of this, and this is the reason why I showed you it, is because looking at the cube of gold, which is all the gold in the world, which is 165,000 tons of gold, and we know empirically that all the gold that's ever been mined in the world has been taken care of and treasured and prized and not been thrown away. And even though gold and silver have been mined at a now 1-to-9 ratio, the amount of silver that's available for investment, but it's a much smaller amount than there is of gold physically, okay? And this says to me that while gold is at the top of this Exeter's, or the bottom of this Exeter's pyramid, it's really silver that is the most liquid and safest metal to be in when it comes time to that it really matters.
So we know that the causes of the crisis that we're walking into, which will create the biggest wealth transfer for 85 years, is either sovereign debt, derivatives liabilities, or unfunded liabilities. I believe that taking action now for you or your clients could put you on the right side of this inevitable wealth transfer. To find out more about what you can do to put yourself on the right side, please visit my website, which is www.WealthTransfer.guru. Thank you for listening. My name is Ian Stamp. Until next time.